a lot of practice doing this now. All right, so I think we are live. Good afternoon and welcome to our panel discussion hosted by the Cari-Bois Foundation. My name is Ardene Sirjoo and we're talking partnerships for wildlife conservation today. Of course, this is all part of our commemoration of World Wildlife Day, which is officially commemorated on the 3rd of March every year. That was just Friday. And so we're a little bit late, we're just 2 days late, but we know there are lots of activities happening. And so we decided to pull our partners together and do something ourselves here at Cari-Bois Foundation. And if you know anything about us, you would know that we believe strongly and firmly in collaboration. And this theme, I think, really spoke to us this year. And again, what better way to commemorate a day like this, of this significance, where we're talking about partnerships, than with our partners on the ground working in conservation, in wildlife conservation in particular. So without any further ado, I'll introduce our panelists this afternoon. We have with us David Mahabir, who is a wildlife biologist and the head of wildlife at the Forestry Division with the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries. We also have with us Ms. Fazeeia Mohammed. You may hear me refer to her as Mindy throughout the afternoon. Her name, that may not appear on the screen, but that's Fazeeia. And she is a data scientist with TTLAB, one of Cari-Bois Foundation's long-standing partners in this work around using how we incorporate data science into sustainability and other such initiatives. And we're really happy to have a representative on the numbers side of this conversation. And we have also joining us the president of the Hunters Association of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Rashad Mohammed. It's a real pleasure to have him here too. And of course, Mark Gibson is our final panelist. He is the director of Nurture Nature campaign, which is really a body of NGOs working in the field of conservation, sustainability, etc. And so we're happy to have him represent that entity here today. Good afternoon and welcome to you all, lady and gents.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And I should take the opportunity to officially welcome everyone who's tuning in on our Facebook live stream. Wherever you are this afternoon, making time to spend an hour or so with us, we are grateful for it. So we're going to jump in and have everyone just tell us a little bit about what they do. So David, I will start with you representing the state agency that has a lot of power, authority, and to whom we look to for some guidance on these matters. We'd ask you to get us going with a little bit about your background and what your division does at the Ministry of Agriculture.
So good afternoon, everyone. So I'm David Mahabir, wildlife biologist, head of wildlife section. Also the assistant conservator of forests. At the wildlife section, we are under the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, Forestry Division. And my job entails research. So I do research when it comes to population surveys, also DNA testing for animals, actually just getting the science behind the animals that we protect. I also supervise and work alongside my game wardens and forest officers. And they also participate in research as well when it comes to wildlife species, because they need to actually understand the animals that they are actually protecting. So also we have an addition of 376 honorary game wardens that is also under the wildlife section as well, that are out there, doing enforcement, protecting the wildlife species. And it's not just wildlife species itself. We deal with also flora, which is the trees and forest areas as well. So that's just in a nutshell of exactly what I do.
Okay, thank you very much for that, David. Mark, we'll come to you now, as a sort of NGO representative working on the ground. Tell us about your perspective working in conservation. Oh, we're not hearing you, Mark. I don't know if you're muted.
Still gets me. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you to the Cari-Bois Foundation for hosting this event today. It's an honor to be able to speak on an event for the World Wildlife Day. I it is one of my most favorite days to celebrate, and most often during the week we say every day is kind of Wildlife Day at Nurture Nature, and that's part of the fun and part of the challenge. And so we are a coalition group. We are representing 13 Trinidad and Tobago nonprofit organizations as a partnership that also works in partnership with other organizations and agencies, including Michigan State University, where I completed my PhD last year. And we've been established since 2018 as a research initiative, and since 2021 as a public advocacy organization. And so partnership is key, and our aim is to reduce, if not end, the harmful trade in pet wildlife.
Great, wonderful. Thank you for that, Mark. Fazeeia, Mindy, we come to you now as the data scientist in the conversation to tell us about the role that you play and an entity like TTLAB can play in this movement.
So with TTLabs, it is a research entity, and they do a lot of publications and things like above ground mass biomass estimation and different things like carbon sequestering predictions. And recently, I was the technical lead in collaboration with the Cropper Foundation, where we got a NGS grant, and we did some research in the area of agriculture and doing predictive analysis in agriculture. So I guess for me, I have a background in both environmental and natural resource management and computer science. And I spend my time collaborating with all these people to do things in the area of the environment, farming adaptation, artificial intelligence, and just generally applying those ideas to the data that people already have, and encouraging data collection efforts in different areas. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mindy. I think it's wonderful to have someone like you take part in this conversation. I mean, we don't often make the link naturally between the work that you do and what everybody else here is doing. Rashad, so it may not be obvious to many people that you are a key stakeholder, your entity is a key stakeholder in conservation. But I think it's also brilliant to have you here to talk a little bit about the Hunters Association and its very important role in this conversation.
Thank you for having me. Well, I am the president of the Hunters Association of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm a fourth generation hunter. I was born into hunting. I was immersed in the outdoors since I was from a very young age. Hunting, fishing, spearfishing, hiking. Now, at the Hunters Association of Trinidad and Tobago, we have been the principal body of sport hunters in Trinidad and Tobago, having been established on April 1st, 1949. Our more introvert activities include our annual field trial and our annual hunt walk. Our more extrovert activities continue to thrive and expand as we were on the fourth committee for the redrafting of the Conservation of Wildlife Act 6701. We also unfailingly support all the appropriate initiatives of the Forestry Division as well as the appropriate agencies, including our own significant endeavors.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rashad, for that sort of overview. So we'll just get into it now. And I think one of the things we wanted to start with is a sense of what is the state of wildlife and wildlife conservation in this country. And David, I think you're perhaps the best person to give us a global sense of that.
So, well, presently, in terms of the our wildlife that we have, we depend on a lot of information from the general public, especially hunters that are out there. And besides research that we are doing at the wildlife section, we are actually now getting a little idea of the species that is outside there, especially the population and the DNA and that kind of thing, to give our perspective in terms of what it is that we have out there. I think when it comes to the game species, Mr. Mohammed might give a better idea of what they have out there. In terms of the protected species that we have, again, it's in, a lot of them are endangered, as you know, and we are still trying to work and encourage persons to protect what we have. We try our best. When it comes to the population out there, it's just like an idea of what we have. It's most of our species, from my knowledge and understanding, are actually very vulnerable in terms of the population. You know.
And when
Mhm.
Sorry,
Go
you
ahead.
said a number of species, but can you specify what some of those are? I mean, I know they're the more
Yeah.
popular ones, but if you could just run us through a
So,
few.
so in terms of the species, would be the manatee, for instance. The population is that we have from preliminary data that actually our assistant is actually collecting as Mr. Naked. It's below 50. My last thesis that I did with the manatee population in the river swamp was around 18. You know,
How
when
does
it was
how does how does that compare, let's say, with 10 years ago? Are
10
you able
years
to paint that
ago.
picture for us?
Yeah, it would have been a lot of them actually, because manatee itself, like, from our knowledge on terms of the behavior, they actually moved from Trinidad to actually Venezuela during the dry season when our water tables are low and for them for food. So it would have been around the last data that was collected from them would have been around 1995, and that population was about 38. So yeah, it's actually maybe a little more, but manatee it's mammals. So understanding mammals and the behavior, they will actually have the population um, in terms of how much food that they and habitat that they could able to have in the wild. So a lot of them will migrate to areas where they could actually get that. You know. So that's just one species. And think of the blue and gold macaw. It's actually improving in terms of the population. Remember, it was extirpated in 1990, in the 90s, and then we introduced them from Guyana in 1995. And then again in 2004, we did a reintroduction as well. And now we have actually been seeing increase in the population of the blue and gold macaw. So that's a success story that we could talk about.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
And well, I mean, I'm sure there are lots of reasons why some species thrive and others don't. But maybe Rashad, this is a good time to ask you to give us your own observations. Obviously, you work very closely with the Forestry Division and with Mr.
Yeah.
Mahabir and others there. But what have been your observations over the years, and how does your association actually help?
Well, some of the observation we have made over the years is there has been a lot of environmental changes where there were waterfalls in the past 10, 15 years, they are no longer there, right? So the animals tend to move to different areas. So you will find animals flock to one specific area, they move. And what was the other question you had?
I was just asking how your association assists.
How we assist? Well, we fill out our data mandatory forms after the hunting season closes, and that gives them a lot of data to enter onto their system.
And some of the other species, can you give us a sense of some of the other species that are under threat from what you were able to perceive?
Poachers, I would say under threat. I don't think we have any animals that are really under threat, right? Because we have a lot of the Paui, there have been a lot of Paui sightings, red howler sightings. So it's difficult to say that they are under threat. So I
Well,
wouldn't say they are really under threat.
okay. Well, David talked about a number of them being endangered. I mean, is it that you don't use those terms interchangeably?
No, I wouldn't say endangered. because
Okay.
we do have manatee all over the world, right? Manatee we are not only found in Trinidad, they are found all over the world. So we have a very small population of manatee, but again, you need to do a proper census to actually count the actual number of them. And it's very difficult to get every one of them, right?
And what is how often are these with a census take place, for instance?
Well, our terrain is pretty unforgiving, so it's very difficult to have an animal census. We tried one, I think it was back in 2014. We did one, and it was very, very difficult. Our terrain, the mountains, the cliffs, the precipice, we found a lot. It was very difficult for us, right? It was very, very difficult for us. We tried our best. We worked with Forestry Division, tried our best. And well, we did get some data. But again, it will not be correct because it's not the entire population, because we were unable to go to certain places, to venture to certain places.
And Mindy, I think this is a good time to bring you in and find out, from your own experience of using the skills that you have and applying it to environmental and sustainability issues. How can what you do help solve some of these challenges of gathering this data?
Well, one of the things that data science and machine learning in specific has created an opportunity for is being able to track animal populations using different types of like satellite imagery, radio telemetry, and being able to track the movements of animals and their behavior help you gain insights into the population dynamics. And I believe that other people in different parts of the world are leveraging this information to help conservationists. So that is one of the ways data science can help. Another way is that it can identify biodiversity hotspots, places that have rich biodiversity versus other places that may not be as stable. With climate change and everything that is happening, being able to find stable habitats to conserve over, really focusing your efforts in areas that would yield good results is really important, because if you focus your efforts too many places, you would end up collapsing, basically. And you can do that based on analyzing data of species richness, endemism, conservation, and it helps you highlight places to conserve, and also predicting places for climate change. Like we have the coral reef in Tobago, knowing the change where is more affected by temperature change would help us focus conservation efforts and replanting a coral in specific areas that are more insulated, and it can help develop models that are more accurate in these predictions based on the data that you collect. Um, and overall, I think data science does play a really critical role in conservation efforts. And there's a lot of opportunity. It takes a little investment, of course, but I'm in the area of trying to find low cost ways to do it in an efficient manner. And that's the beauty of data science. There's always some sort of solution, some problem solving that can happen. So, yeah.
And are you two already working together, Mindy, you and David, or and
No,
TTLAB?
it's the
Or
first
Not
is
yet.
time.
it,
First
But
time
I
I'm.
actually, we actually do a lot of work with UE and UTT, and there's a number of projects that we're doing in terms of population, not just only mammals only. We also do even ants, bachaks. We do
okay.
different surveys, and that data is there. So whenever Mrs. Miss Mohammed wants it, she could actually get. Because part of this section we partner also with different communities, and like for instance the sea turtle program that we have. So we have the population when it comes to sea turtles and the nesting sites and that sort of stuff. So now since I started about 2 years now at the wildlife section, together with the conservator of forest, Mr. Dipchan Singh, we actually partner with a lot of projects with UE and also international scientists and professors, they also can come down. They actually do a lot of research as well, and that information is there. So it's because of lack of funding too from our ministry, and then over the past 2 years with COVID, it's been difficult for us to actually go out and gather our information in our own way, So we try our best, and we are actually, like, for instance, we have Miss Lala, who is a forester tree. She actually spearhead our waterfall survey, so we have an idea of the waterfall that is outside there. That's the scarlet ibis and the pink flamingos, and now they're actually nesting in Guadino Swamp in South, which have never happened before. So those are some of the projects that we do island-wide, during the week.
Well, I'm happy you mentioned COVID because, it's one of the things that was said to have flourished during COVID, that it was almost like we saw all these species claiming back their habitats. So, Mark, what can you tell us about your own observations being on the ground working as a conservationist in both Trinidad and Tobago? Oh, I think you're muted still, Mark. Sorry.
Once again, great. Well, maybe I'll clarify that question. And I work as a conservationist, yes, but I'm actually a wildlife criminologist, or a green criminologist first, right? Okay. So what I study is actually multiple dimensions of harm. Okay, so we would look at things like animal welfare, zoonotic disease risk, as much as biodiversity conservation, whether it's keeping species from extinction or keeping invasives out. So there's a lot of room to talk about wildlife and harms. Maybe I'll just contribute a little bit to some of what I've heard today. I think there have been some really nice points talking about this idea of local versus global extinction risk, right? So there are species here that are found nowhere else that definitely merit protection. Trinidad white-fronted capuchin, which we don't have really great population data on. That's critically endangered. Pawi, anecdotally, we hear it's coming up. It sounds like it might be a good time for an assessment to show that hopeful conservation gain. Of course, sea turtles, such a challenge still, but has come so far. And then if you're looking at a local level, it's complicated even more to talk about what's locally endangered, like Rashad was getting at, and knowing what's missing and what's abundant. Absolutely, we need more research. I would point out a few species that I've been hearing about, or call them taxa, that we might be a little worried about and think about for future wildlife days. One, I'll go right to marine and talk about fisheries and TT, right? If you go to IMA's webpage, you'll see commentary about unsustainable fishing and a lot of hardship associated with fish stocks that need recovery. If you speak to conservationists as much as songbird enthusiasts, you hear about how a lot of songbirds are missing locally. And some fetch incredible prices if you could catch one. And then other species that are really unique for Trinidad with subspecies like the ocelot and the Trinidad red howler. So I would point all those out as species that we got to think about. We need more research and direction towards.
So, I mean, I think you've said a lot there in terms of some of the different species that need attention. But you mentioned the sea turtles, specifically the leatherback turtles, and the success we've experienced there. And it would be interesting to hear from you all, what, or maybe a couple of you, what contributed to that success? Because I think it is one of the stories, those of us who've been around for long enough to pay attention to how that has evolved over the years. It is a sort of shining star. But what happened to allow that success, to facilitate that success?
So I can start with that success story. So let's say about 40 years ago, sea turtles, especially leatherback turtles, was actually one of the endangered species that we have back then, where communities would have participated in poaching of the turtles themselves. And what the Forestry Division embarked back then is community patrols. So the same persons that were actually poaching the turtles realized, well, okay, it's better off to protect them. They get income in terms of tour guiding and patrols from Forestry Division. And we actually see we turn around that sad story, which would have been where the same persons would have been poaching the turtles and now protecting the turtles. And those are some of the persons that we have. Nature Seekers is one of them, on especially Granny Bay as well. It's a all success story. So I think when it comes to human intervention, it's we have to protect them. But I mean, there's only limited that we could do as officers. So we encourage a lot of community outreach program, and we include the community in all aspect of research that we do. I believe in persons that actually live in the areas that we have endangered species, and that's where we try to encourage it from them. Those are the persons who actually, that's in the backyard, that's in the background, so we work alongside with communities, and that helps us a lot. And that's the success story that we are actually seeing today, where leatherback turtle population internationally is actually in a decline. I saw
Public education was a big part of that as well.
it was. I saw Mr. Brandon Murphy ask a question, what we do to help sensitize the public. So that is one of the things that we do. We do a lot of public education. We work with schools, actually for World Wildlife Day. We had a couple of schools there. Officers also go there and educate the public when it comes to simple thing, like not simple, but like forest fires that is going on right now. We do a lot of training also when it comes to species that we protect, and we do a lot of public awareness. And that is what we could do, something like what you all are doing here today in terms of virtual sensation, in terms of highlighting World Wildlife Day. These are some of the things that we do and we take for granted when it comes to virtual streaming, and it's free, and this is some of the stuff that we do from our end to actually educate the public.
Rashad, I'm curious about your perspective on, the role of people in this story, because you talked about the environment changing and therefore habitats not being hospitable as they once were, and so animals having or species having to move. But what about the role of us humans in causing this harm, as Mark would have alluded to as well?
Yes, well, one of the greatest problems that we have is habitat loss, and that has been a problem, not only in Trinidad but all over the world. And if, like, this morning I took a drive, I went to Orozco Beach this morning, and on the way there were quarries. I mean, dozens and dozens of quarries. When you take away the animal habitats, they just disappear, and that has been a problem from ever since.
So you see development as the major factor in terms of habitat loss, contributing to habitat loss.
Yes.
As opposed to, let's say, climate change.
Absolutely.
And what about the role of people who hunt animals sort of indiscriminately?
There is a difference between a sport hunter and a poacher, and a lot of people cannot tell the difference between a sport hunter and a poacher. Sport hunters, we hunt within the law. Poachers, they don't. They hunt 24/7, 365 days a year. And that has been a problem all the time. That has always been a problem. But now with the HGW program, we have a couple hunters on the HGW program. Hopefully,
what is the HGW program?
The Honorary Game Warden program.
Okay.
Yes. So hopefully, it will make a difference to slow down or even stop the poaching.
So is it that hunters have traditionally worked to identify poachers as well and bring them to the attention of the authorities?
Yes, we have been working. We were part of the Honorary Game Warden program since the beginning. That was probably back in the 90s. Mr. Buddy Miller, he used to book Miss Suzanne Lacan on the beaches of Orozco. They patrol the beaches at night, just like David was speaking
Mm-hmm.
about earlier. And they arrested a lot of people. They had a lot of success in arresting poachers, right? Protecting the leatherback turtles. And it was, well, and it's still continuing up to this day.
Do you think the Hunters Association and people who hunt in general, whether it's for sport, do you feel that the public has a sense of them or you being different from poachers? Do
No.
you and do you see that? Do you think people see you as an ally in conservation?
Well, normally when people report illegal hunting, they say hunters. They normally say hunters. They don't say poachers or illegal hunters,
Right,
right? Now, I fall in that category with hunters. So if anybody look at me and say, "Oh, you're a hunter," first thing comes to people's mind, you're a poacher. There
right.
is a difference between a legitimate sport hunter and a poacher.
So how do you address that is your perception or misperception?
Through education, we have to educate the public about that.
And how do you do that?
Well, we probably would print something in the newspaper, put it up on social media. That's how we would address that.
Just to
Okay.
add, also, so we have a wildlife conservation committee, and in that panel, well, that committee itself, there's a representative from the Hunters Association. So they will actually they meet once per month, and they will actually share information and kind of like that they made the decisions when it comes to conservation of our wildlife species. So, and they are the advisors to the minister himself. So they will provide him with the information that they will ask, so that we have to protect the animals that we have and the habitats. So that's the air of the Hunters Association, you know. So there's a representative from there. There's actually two, and then there's one from the University of the West Indies, someone from the Birds Association, Forestry Division, Wildlife Section, the police as well, department. So there's representative from those entities that work together to help our wildlife species and the habitats.
Thank you, David. And Mark, you mentioned the wildlife trade earlier, and I mean, and that is a major focal point of the work that you do. Why is that so popular? Why is the appeal, you think, so significant in this country?
Great question. We piece through it in different ways, but some of the best explanations would be part of its geography, that you can relate this to Trinidad really being part of this Orinoco bioregion. We're centuries of history where rafts of vegetation come floating out, and maybe someone gets a tortoise, and birds flying over just short ways, and people realizing there's other species that might visit. And just the indigenous aspect as well as that trade that would have gone from Warao indigenous up to Trinidad, Tobago, and all the way up the islands as far as Dominica, if I recall correctly. So there's a history of trade, and then of course we have Venezuela right next door, which is, I think the latest estimate is 80% of that country is in extreme poverty. So you have tremendous motivation. You would call that a very strong supply side. And you hear that from the traffickers, that a lot of times they'll get supply and they can't even sell it all. And the other side is demand. There's a lot of culturally embedded use of wildlife. The green parrot is found in about 1 in every 10 homes, if not more frequently. And same with songbirds. Bullfinch keeping is an incredibly popular activity. I'm sure everyone in Trinidad has seen someone, a grown man walking his cage, with his bird in it. And it's, if you don't know what they're doing, it looks kind of funny, but it's also something with tremendous cultural embedding. So culture, economy, geography. You have a lot of reason that Trinidad's really this hotspot for wildlife trade.
And do you have any figures, Mark, that you can share with us in terms of how that trade is flourishing, quote unquote, at the moment?
Yeah, it's in the world of wildlife trade data, especially when you're getting into illegal trades, not legal trades, it's really tricky to get a good estimate. I am quite proud of our research group, though. We did a national household survey and can estimate that there are somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 captive wild animals, which is a very large number for a country with just about 1 million, a little over 1 million people. It's if you start thinking then about trade, and you would need some advanced modeling. Maybe I need to talk to Mindy about a data science approach. But if you could model that trade effectively, account for mortality rates that we hear from traffickers, it just a ballpark estimate would suggest that you're importing 100 to 200,000 animals a year as well, with at least half of those animals dying in transit or in extraction. And some species die at much higher numbers. So with it being illegal, it gets very dirty and very damaging for the animals. I did see a comment from I think it was Pat Turpin on zoonotic diseases. So I'll just throw in there, the conditions of this trade mean it is also a zoonotic disease hotspot.
Can you just explain for those of us who may not be familiar with zoonotic diseases?
Yeah, it's diseases, vectors, bacteria, viruses, other harmful microorganisms. That some would be found normally in wild animal populations. So armadillo, I don't know if it's ever been shown here in Trinidad, but in the US, for instance, armadillo or tattoo would be a carrier for Hansen's disease or leprosy. And that's just a very classic example of a really scary disease. Other things might just be more like intestinal ailments and nothing quite as scary as say Ebola, which is found in primate species. So wildlife is a repository for disease that can affect humans. We get a bit nervous here when we see so many different types of species mixing in the trade. We've identified over 200 terrestrial species alone. And we get nervous when we see things like chicken crates being used to carry macaws and other birds. Most people don't know that in the last couple of years, avian flu is a major concern. It's now in Venezuela. It's in some Caribbean countries. And if you're using contaminated chicken crates, that's just yet another scary vector to bring it into Trinidad.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for raising that point, because I don't think it's something we think about, the mixing of these different species as well. And what do you think about cultural attitudes? And I would ask this of anyone who's interested in responding to it. Cultural attitudes to wildlife, in the sense that we often see those other species from the bush, putting it very plainly, as a threat, and it's something to get rid of because it causes harm. I mean, of course, very notably, even the horsewhip snakes, as simple, I think many people who have any element of bush in their yards or wherever they live would be familiar with those. But for many people, there's a sense of fear about snakes in general, but many other species seem to cause fear, and we don't seem to understand the relationship between ourselves and the natural environment. So how do we bridge what is a yawning gap between the public and wildlife species?
Is that directed at me?
Well, anybody who is willing to jump in at this point.
Recently, I worked with Turtle Village Trust, and they were concerned a little bit about what knowledge they had out there. I was a mentor for a young person in UAE who was building a kind of interactive chatbot to share and disseminate information on how you go about visiting the trust and what happens at the trust, and then information about the species that they have there. And I think that a lot of ecotourism and a lot of NGOs are interested in having a more vibrant online presence. And there are like chatbots is a NLP machine learning solution, and there are people in the organization that I work with that are willing to do these kinds of projects in a way to help NGOs be more represented out there. So yeah, I think
How we use technology to
yeah.
engage. Yeah, that I think that's a very useful tool as well. Rashad, I don't know if you have any ideas on that. Your observations of how um, regular people interact with wildlife and the fear around it, and how we can educate people more widely about these different species.
Well, I realize once their children loses the fear, the parents also lose the fear. Just a couple of days ago, Forestry Division celebrated World Wildlife Day, and a lot of the children were there touching the snake. I took one of the snakes from the Emperor Valley Zoo boot, and I had it, and the kids came. They started playing with it. One of the teachers saw that. Oh, if the children can touch it, I can touch it as well. She actually held it in her hand. First time I'm holding a snake. Yes. So we need to educate the younger generation so they can teach the other generation, the upcoming generation.
So you feel that this is something that maybe could be done through schools and communities.
Yes.
David, you wanted to say something.
No, I totally agree with Rashad in terms of education, especially with the young ones, especially those are the ones that actually will correct the parent. Couple of times we actually do like visit schools, and we do have our educational talks with them, and they will actually say, well, the dad went, and that's really close season and hunt, and they realize, well, they are doing something wrong, and they actually are the ones that will educate the older ones. That's somebody how to put it, the dynamics in terms of educating persons. You start from the younger ones first, and then they will correct the older ones, like the adults. Adults person, they know, most of them will actually know about wildlife and conservation, But when a younger person actually corrects an adult to say, Dad, this is what you're doing something wrong, they will actually listen. And we have found, like, over the past few years, this has been happening, and we actually have requests from other schools. And they could actually, schools, anyone out there that want us to visit them, we could actually do that as well. We have our forestry education bus that goes to different communities and schools, and there's we educate them about wildlife and wildlife conservation, and not just animals also, but trees is very important. You need to include that. I saw Ms. Mohammed was talking about coral reefs. We need to also do a lot of education when it comes to that, because it's not really out there. Only those who actually know about it will know about it, but they don't know the benefits of the reefs itself. I saw Mr. Gibson talk about species that is entering the country. Invasive species, once it's out there into our local population, is a big problem. Zoonotic diseases also as well. So these are some of the topics that we have to actually discuss, like what we are doing here, and educate the persons about it. Yeah, you get an animal from the mainland, but you don't know what diseases they have. If that escape, what is going to happen to our local animals, our population out there?
Mindy, sorry, thank you, David. Brandon is asking about NLP. I mean, I know you used it, and I should have asked you to just break it down for us. But
I saw the message of natural language processing. So when you communicate with chatbots, it's really best practice to try and mimic how people communicate in that area. So she did a little bit of Trinidad dialect, and she broke down the language so that when people asked about certain things, that they had the information in a way that they understood. which was something that is really important in bot building and that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Mark, did you have any thoughts to offer on that question, the previous question?
Education. So education is necessary, but as the green criminologist, spending too much time studying the literature and evidence-based practice, we know that education is necessary but insufficient alone. And if you look into the conservation evidence, there's some good websites and repositories. Education comes out having a mixed bag. It sometimes helps, sometimes doesn't. And that then gets into big questions of how do we approach conservation issues, wildlife management issues. I think most importantly is that we adopt other solutions that have also some pretty good evidence behind them and some very just common sense things like some legal reform. There are aspects of the law that are kind of funny. A great example we use a lot is the green parrot, the most commonly kept wild animal in the country, found in 1 in 10 homes. That's actually completely illegal for 7 months of the year to have in your possession. The way it's
7 months?
Mm-hmm.
Which
Every
7?
year. Closed season.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
And
technically under Conservation of Wildlife Act, there's not actually any regulation or clause that actually allows you to even own it legally. So for 7 months of the year, anyone who has a green parrot is subject to, I think technically it's a $10,000 fine, but it's not enforced. And that's crazy, you know.
And that's actually where we need to take the conversation, right? To the realm of enforcement. And I'm sorry, David, but this is always going to fall to you, these questions. But of course, we all have a part to play. But it is a major part of what we perhaps are not talking enough about when we talk about conservation, is it?
No, it's not. Because there's, when it comes to enforcement, and over the past couple of years, government actually, and I'm sure lots of many panels will agree that over the past couple of years, with the additional 29 new game wardens and then the additional 376 honorary game wardens, that's a big dent in terms of going out there and actually doing the enforcement that we're supposed to be doing. Before we had a shortage in terms of our staff and to manage the entire both Trinidad and Tobago was very difficult. So yeah, enforcement is there. Also, there's definitely legal reform that need to be done. As we celebrate 50 years for CITES, Trinidad is still a Category 2 country where we don't have the CITES implementation in our country.
Can you tell us about CITES, please, David?
So CITES is actually where all countries, 189 different countries across the world, actually a signatory to protection of wildlife traded species. So Trinidad and Tobago being very close to the mainland, a lot of our species are actually listed in CITES itself. So there's where you have to, let's say you have to purchase or you have to transfer of ownership from one country to the next. They will actually apply for a CITES permit. And us, in terms of each country, will have a scientific authority, which is under my office, and the management authority, which is under the Wildlife Conservation Committee. Those are the ones who make the decisions. They also work along different ministries, which is like fisheries or animal health, and I will get guidance from them for any requests concerning wildlife species or even non-species as well. So it's where all countries, well, most of them across the world, are the ones who actually will be protecting their species that they think is vulnerable. So, for instance, for us, the Blongo macaw is vulnerable, endangered, as we'll use the term. But in Guyana, Suriname, it's not. So each country will propose for their species to be listed as Appendix 1, 2, or 3 species. And Mr. Gibson is also will talk about the songbirds that we are working on to actually have a couple of our songbirds listed as endangered species under CITES. So wouldn't be treated illegally that it's happening right now.
We do have a few questions,
Yeah.
and Laura Williams is asking, do you think citizens of TNT understand how important wildlife is to our development?
I think most of them do. Um, but in terms of how important it is, they don't, because they will think there's so much outside there in the wild, and it's okay to keep them as a pet, or cook it, or however way they decide to. But they don't know, exactly how important it is in terms of the population, and in terms of how the biological species is important to our whole entire ecosystem and biodiversity. That's a whole different topic by itself. Development, persons need their house, they need to, clear down a piece of land to actually put up their structure, but they don't know the repercussions of doing that. And this is what we experience right now when it comes to bushfires and flooding and that kind of thing. So persons need to be more aware.
Mindy, do you think there's a space here for us to maybe do some work to determine just how aware we are of the importance of wildlife to development?
So I recently took up researching the coral reefs, and I think that having a more integrated approach is probably best. And okay, so for the last project that I worked on, we created a mobile application, we created a web application to help people understand and learn about, agriculture in Trinidad and how climate change affects it. And I think that same approach where, you study something, you learn about it, you do some research, and then you create something so that other people can see or have vision of what it is was done and how it can help you is a big part of it. And like I said, working with Turtle Village Trust and mentoring young people in data science, I've come to realize that there are a lot of people interested in putting that information out there. So yeah, I definitely do think that there are different approaches that we can take, and a lot of people will have different approaches. And it's just to be out there and willing to, hear them out and probably put something into action.
And David, it sounds like working with an entity like TTLAB, for instance, and people like Mindy, it would be helpful to get a real sense of how knowledgeable we are as a country, as a society, about the importance of these issues. Because it's always interesting when you ask the questions directly and you look at the data to see what people know from what they don't know. And it's surprising, shocking even, the things we may take for granted that people know that they really don't, right?
I totally agree. I always believe in data and facts. That's what I work with, and I'm sure Mindy will understand that as well. And that's why very happy if you could come along and have a discussion with us with the wildlife section, and let's analyze some of these data and the information that we need to actually get an idea of what we are discussing here today in terms of population, how they think, and you know, I
Rashad,
absolutely agree.
Rashad, I'm not sure if you've been seeing the comments, well, from Patricia too, but in particular about people in Tobago loving their wild meat and, every excuse for a fat with wild meat year round. It's
Year round.
entrenched year round.
Yes, year
What,
round.
what are your thoughts on that? I mean, Mark also talked about the demand side. The reality is there is a demand for wild meat, and people are willing to take the risk to eat it at
To
any time of the year.
poach. Yeah, to poach it. Well,
Yeah.
I don't know why, but everybody think that when you eat wild meat, you get some type of superpower. So everybody have to have it. Everybody have to enjoy it. To get this superpower, we eating wild meat. We are partying and partying with the wild meat, right? Now, it sometimes it's just traditional. We have a lot of families. They grow up, their dad hunt and stuff like that, and the dad always every year for Christmas bring them on a goatee and they cook it and eat it. But for some weird reason that I cannot explain, Trinidadians really think that they're going to have some big superpower or some, I don't know, outburst when they eat the wild meat.
Well, I get the impression it's not just Trinidad. It seems Tobago is afflicted by the same thing.
Yes, and that's been a problem ever since.
So it's a cultural thing, you're saying?
Yes, I would say it's a cultural thing. But again, most of the times it happens in the open season, but it also happens in closed season. And that is a very big problem. And the first thing people do, they tend to blame the sport hunters. The hunters are doing it, not the poachers. We always get the blame. Again, we have to educate the public on the difference between a sport hunter and a poacher.
Mark, what do you make of that, of the cultural part of it from your observations? I mean, obviously you're not from here, but I'm sure there's some keen observations you've made about how the culture affects these habits.
Yeah.
And the risks people are willing to take.
Sure. Yeah. Trinidad is a tropical country, and it's high biodiversity, and there's forests, and it's highly accessible, and there's traditions of using game species, plants from forests, fruiting plants, medicinal plants. Like there's a culture of use here, and I guess like Rashad is pointing out, there's a need to recognize cultural use while balancing that against just being able to sustain the resource. I as a green criminologist, sometimes conservationist, I don't have an issue with hunting in itself. It's just we don't want it to be unsustainable. And I think that's the common ground I can find usually with hunters, because I'm not a hunter myself. But I've always found, if you ask someone, do you want to be able to teach your kid how to hunt and have the same species, that usually the answer is yes, right? And that's usually a great starting place to say, hey, there are some species we need to take care of. There are some illegal hunting and unsustainable aspects that we need to take care of. With regards to Tobago, if you want just some really simple statistics from our national survey, we actually asked how many households eat wild meat in Trinidad compared to Tobago. And in Trinidad, we found with a randomized national survey, close to a quarter, one in four houses had consumed wild meat within the previous year. It's just one person. So it's kind of a fuzzy metric here. But in Tobago, it's actually very high. It's almost 50%. One in two homes in Tobago has consumed wild meat there within the last year. And you see slightly higher rates of hunting. So in Tobago, there's a much greater culture of having wild meat, buying it for holidays, sharing it with people you want to show appreciation for. And that's a tricky culture to balance when it's an island and you can run out of species. A great example in Tobago that's just breaks my heart is realizing that quenk or wild hog, peccary, that we don't even have good data for this, but as best we can tell, it's now locally extinct, or it is past the genetic threshold. Like the few remaining peccary in the wild are not enough to sustain it. And that's largely a hunting, and some having to do with habitat loss and fragmentation. But the final quenk probably would have been hunted out. So, hunting does play a role, and we have to find ways to balance that against the needs of the ecosystem and greater society.
Mark, to be clear, it's hunting or poaching, you mean? Just for Rashad's benefit here.
Right. Poaching is a huge issue, right? And that occurs closed season, that occurs when people go out and violate other laws. Maybe they don't have a permit during hunting season. Maybe it's an unlicensed firearm. Maybe they're hunting at night with a light, which they're not supposed to do. I mean, there's lots of, under current law, there's a lot of ways that you could be hunting illegally. I prefer the term illegally hunting. You also have to look at the way the law is done now. Trinidad does lag behind many countries within the Americas, within Latin America, but kind of on par with many other Caribbean islands, just that it doesn't have a strong scientific basis to its hunting policies. And you would really say that it doesn't incorporate a precautionary approach. A great example of that, a precautionary approach would say you should have bag limits, a limit to how much each hunter could take in a given season, say for a particular species. And that might make sense.
So we don't have limits right now.
No bag limits for any species in the country. And that's pretty foundational to hunting management everywhere else.
I would like to get Rashad to respond to that, because that
Yes.
sounds like
Well,
that's a largely ethical issue as well.
we have thought about having a bag limit and a tagging system where you have to tag the animal after you harvest it. We went through this for years, and there's no way it's going to work. The only way it's going to work is if it's self-policed, right? Which means the individual actually have to be honest and do the right thing, put the tag in the air, and say, yes, I have one tag for one animal, and take it in. But how often is this going to happen? We simply don't have enough game wardens to patrol to ensure that this is done properly. So again, a tagging system in Trinidad would not work unless we have enough game wardens to patrol.
And so this is even with the addition that David mentioned at the start.
Yes, because I mean, think about it. We have well over 400 game wardens. If we only have 400 police officers to man the whole of Trinidad, it's very difficult.
So what about hunters taking responsibility? I mean, in the absence of bag limits, let's say, what kinds of conversations do you have among yourselves regarding what is an ethical number of kill someone should leave the forest with?
Well, normally when a hunter harvests an animal, they normally leave the forest to go back and make a cook.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that is basically it. Normally they take one, maybe two animals, probably a weekend. But again,
But how often are they doing that?
Well, that's the thing. I was just about to get to that. Our hunting season has been cut short because of the weather, the inclement weather. We have, well, this year we got 2.5 months of hunting season, good weather, because all of October last year, all of November, December, we had a lot of rain. Hunters cannot hunt in the rain. You cannot hear the hounds barking in the rain. You're wet, you're cold. It cannot happen. So our hunting season has been cut really, really short. Now, most of the sport hunters, if not all of the sport hunters, we do have to work, right? And we usually hunt on weekends. So if you really count 2.5 months, how many weekends you have to hunt? It's just a couple days.
So is it a conversation that is happening among you at the moment? The idea of whether there should be a self-imposed limit in the absence of the legal reform?
Well, no, we had that discussion already, and we realized that chances are this is not going to work, because only a very few of us, because there are a lot of poachers who pose as sport hunters as well. Illegal hunters that pose as sport hunters, and it will not work. It will only work among the law-abiding citizens, and the illegal will continue to do their thing.
Well, we don't have too much time left, but we will take a few more questions from the audience. So we're inviting you to submit those at this time. Brandon has another question. Can agriculture, farming, wildlife for meat help with satisfying the demand for game meat consumption?
I personally think that's a very brilliant question in terms of wildlife farming. It's something that the Forestry Division had done for about 30-something years. We have stopped it because of the legality when it comes to keeping game species during the close season. That's where the conflict came up. But it actually helped in a small way sustain consumption of wild game species, that is, in our forest areas. We did so where the requests for these game species for wildlife farming was there. The demand was there. Also exchanging of so each farmer will actually exchange their agouti with the next agouti and try to change up the gene pool, and it was successful. Each farmer we had where they will actually release a pair of their farmed species into the wild. So it was working, and now it's just under review um, at the present moment right now.
Does anybody else have any thoughts on that, on farming wildlife?
I'll jump in just for a quick minute, just to follow up on that idea of legal reform. So I'm in favor of wildlife farming and breeding in when it makes sense, right? Like there's certain limits that some species really won't ever make economic sense. They're too hard. I mean, wild animals, that's kind of the definition. They're not domesticated. It can be hard to breed some of these in captivity. But for species with research behind them, UE has done research on agouti, I believe, wild hog, and there are examples of wild animals being bred for meat and consumption elsewhere. It's something important to look into. I think also it can play a role in helping to bring back species that are depleted or close to depleted. But just we got to keep in mind that requires a supportive legal framework. It's not legal to breed wildlife right now. And if you're going to breed for release, it requires genetics. Breeding and the genetics for agriculture, disease resistance, and other factors are very different from the genetic diversity that you'd want to promote in the wild. So you'd need kind of a system that looks to do both things if you're going to do them right.
Aliyah Amanda Ali says, consider shorter season from December through February, as opposed to almost half the year, bag limit tags, and no youngs. That's what Aliyah is proposing. Rashad, I see is that a faint smile I see there?
Like I just said, the rain shortens the season for us. Right? You can't run the dog in the rain. They damage your paws. It hurts the animal. It hurts the dogs. So we can't hunt in the rain. And that has been a
December
problem.
to February seems too short for you.
Could you repeat that?
December to February, Aliyah's proposition of December to February.
Yeah, that's pretty short.
Well, I'm sure this is a conversation that will have to continue. But before we go, what are the barriers to legal reform right now? Why is that not further along the agenda? David or Mark?
Well, on Nurture Nature's side, among our coalition with 13 NGOs, that's something we've discussed a lot, and we do have internal drafts of a strategy that could take us there. We've spoken to different possible partners, but it's a legal reform. I've been part of projects in other countries in the Caribbean, in Latin America, and Europe. Legal reforms are not done overnight. It takes a long time to get it set up. You need a good process to make sure our stakeholders are involved. It's fair and equitable, and you're really trying to hit your principles. And I think balancing sustainability with cultural use is a really good challenge and something that should be built into that process. This just like TTFNC in the comments here, I see, why not just ban wild meat? And I would just go back to the statistics. One out of every two houses in Tobago consumes wild meat, expects wild meat. Banning it might just create a massive black market and a law that doesn't work.
Right.
But you could find ways to balance that. Maybe banning certain types of wild meat for endangered local species, or types of wild animals for certain local species would be interesting. Peccary in Tobago, you can still buy wild hog here, but it's disappeared, so it comes in from Trinidad. And last population assessment data I saw with EMA and UE supporting was that peccary is really diminished in Trinidad. And though data is limited, they would be a great candidate for a precautionary approach to try and allow that one species to recover if you're going to follow the literature.
David, any thoughts on legal reform and what is holding us back at the moment?
Presently, in terms of legal reform on as Mark say, with their NGO, being in partnership with other NGOs. It's in discussion. Well, that's why we have the Wildlife Conservation Committee. That's why we have representatives from different organizations at that particular committee itself. And it's in like, again, we need data, we need information in order for us to actually start to say, well, okay, well, we're going to put a bag limit on wild hog, for instance, as Mark mentioned, So there's need a demand for data before we can actually do any sort of legal reform when it comes to our species. And
But I
also
get the impression.
consultation that the
I
hunters.
get the impression. Sorry. I
Go
get the
ahead.
impression there is already data based on some things you pointed out earlier.
Yeah, that's because that's the project that we have been doing for the past 2 years, in order to, you need actually more years in terms of getting the exact population for your species, I think Mindy might be able to share more light when it comes to data and how you're going to make a decision with just 2 years of information. So you can go ahead.
Mindy?
Mindy.
Oh, I was gonna ask a question. I was gonna ask, how do you go about collecting this data, and how,
Mm-hmm.
like, we could take it off, this, but I really would like to know a little bit more about how you collect the data, and what you all are doing with it, and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah,
So I
to
will
see
give
what I
a
can,
yeah,
yeah.
I will give a perfect one of the examples. So we have our manatee population survey that we are doing. As I mentioned, Mr. Naked, who is part of UTT that is doing his PhD on it. So we partnered together with them. And we are actually getting a population for the East Coast, which is Libya, Nareva, and Tura around there. So we are doing where we actually we use the side scan sonar because the water itself is very murky, and then we do actually do sightings. Then from there now, our next step is doing the DNA, so you can identify for each individual species by using the DNA, either the collection of the feces or live capture and just collecting the blood samples from them. That's the only way we could actually get the true population that we have out there, and that's just one species. We also do our waterfall surveys every week, 2 days for the week, different areas. I mean, some persons will say if we counting back the same bird, but no, we have knowledgeable persons who are there to help us as well. Our game wardens are very knowledgeable in terms of research. Mr. Dale, as some of you all will know, Mr. Arena Dale, he actually go along with our foresters, and they actually collect the data from there. So for the past 2 years since I'm there, minus trying to put a structure in place in terms of the wildlife section itself, and then with the increase of officers, we also started to do our research information for different species, and plus UV itself is doing over since I'm there 15 different species. And that information is what we have at the section itself. So we actually have our officers going alongside with them because we actually have to monitor in terms of when people say they're collecting data. We need to know exactly what they're actually collecting. They might want to collect one species and then they do something else with it. But the international organization, Trinidad, I mean, the Caribbean itself is 11,000. It's our biodiversity hotspot. It's 11,000 plant species that is found worldwide. 72 of them is actually in the Caribbean. So, and especially for Trinidad, that's like important for us. So we need to, or whatever information and data we collect, we are trying from our end. But in order to do that, we have to partner with different organizations.
Well, as we get ready to wrap up, I would like to invite each of you to maybe inform the public, invite the public to do something, to take some form of action that could assist wildlife conservation efforts. Because we may also have a very sort of narrow view of what wildlife involves. So if there's one thing from each of your perspectives that you think the public, broadly speaking or narrowly speaking, can do to assist these efforts. Rashad, maybe we can start with you.
Yes, I think we need to plant some more trees. One of the ideas that I had was to start a seed drive with hunters, amongst hunters. We could distribute these seeds while we sell the state game license through Forestry Division. So we could plant more trees deeper into the forest, because there are seedling drives that occurs year round in the country, but we can only take the seedlings so far because of the amount of dirt. So I think a seed drive among hunters and among, well, the general public, hikers, anyone who goes in the outdoors, take a couple of seeds with you, plant them, take them into the deepest, darkest part of the forest, and just take up a stick, poke a hole in the ground, stick it in.
All right. That's very practical. Thank you for that, Rashad. Mark?
I'll put a plug in for Nurture Nature. One of our biggest messages is don't buy wild. And we mean that in respect to wild caught animals. It's a pet keeping practice. We have no problem keeping parrots and other animals, but what we see in the trade is that if you're getting them from the wild, you're going to be part of a very destructive system of trade. You're going to be part of a very harmful to animals sort of system with high mortality, high disease, and high rates of illegality. So if you're going to get a pet animal, if you have to have something like a parrot, visit your pet store, find something captive bred. There are so many incredible options. There's also other breeders in the region, and with the right paperwork, you can get some incredible animals that are well adapted to captivity. And of course, much love to our TTSPCA, Animals Alive, Animals 360 with our group. Dogs, cats, so many cats and dogs need homes. So don't buy wild, and go and get yourself an amazing dog or cat that requires a home if you really want a pet. So that's our message to everyone.
Thank you so much, Mark. Mindy?
So I guess on our part, participation is something that I would encourage people to do. Surveys come across all the time for different things, especially in data science, and survey data is one of the main ways that we get, general feedback from the public, and we learn about, how things are going, how things are growing, regression analysis, and those sorts of things. So yeah, I think participation is a big part of it, and also occasionally we do labs where the public is allowed to, come in, label data, say what they've seen and that kind of stuff. So we're always looking for participants in that area also. Yeah.
And David?
Hi. So, as I always say, public outreach in terms of public awareness, sharing of information. That is what the Forestry Division does. Working alongside different NGOs and groups and community-based organizations is our key in order to share, actually collect information to and share information out there. And I think so. In terms of just to add, I know Professor Gary Wayne Garcia, he had done some work on wildlife farming for consumption. That information is there. Also, we have, and it was done in 2013, where we have a 6-year hunting report by the wildlife section. I could also provide reports of hunting by species up to last season. So these are the things that we could do by sharing of information from our end, letting people know about conservation. I mean, we're not going to put a total ban in terms of hunting species. I mean, as Rashad will have mentioned, it's a sport for some persons. We have to understand and work alongside different persons and the culture and tradition. We have to keep that in mind. And again, data collection is most important, especially scientific data collection, as Mindy mentioned, and working alongside NGOs like Nurturing Nature, it's important. And having a forum just like this is what we're doing, sharing information. And I think we'll go a long way with it.
Does the Forestry Division have social media presence?
We do under the ministry. So under the ministry itself, on their webpage, ever so often we have Facebook Lives. I actually did one for World Wildlife Day that is shared every year. Also, we do yeah, like we had, as mentioned before, celebrated World Wildlife Day, and that was shared live. So yeah, we do have it under the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries Facebook page. There's a lot of information that is shared there.
And of course, all of the other entities represented here today also have their online presence on social media and just their website, so you can
Yep.
check them out. The Hunters Association of Trinidad and Tobago, TTLAB, Nurture Nature campaign. You can look out for them and get involved in their work. Also, I see Aaliyah here says that one of their foundation's mission is to plant at least one forest or indigenous feeding tree every month. So that's an awesome idea, Rashad. I don't know which foundation she might be referring to, but thank you very much for that, Aaliyah. And thank you to everyone who tuned in to be part to here, to learn, to contribute to this discussion. And of course, to our panelists who made time on this Sunday afternoon to be part of the conversation and take it forward. Hopefully, we won't limit this talk to Wildlife Day, but we'll find ways to continue working together to produce the results we need to see in the sector going forward. So thank you again, Mindy, Rashad, Mark, and David for your
Thanks,
time and
dear.
effort. And I want to recognize my colleague, Nikita Ali, whose idea this was to commemorate World Wildlife Day in such a major way this year on the part of the Proper Foundation. And of course, to all my colleagues who are working behind the scene to make this broadcast possible. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Right,
And
so that brings us to an end, folks. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
you.
Yeah.
And thanks to Aliyah and Miss
Bye.
Pierre, who do all of the work with us as well. Nice. And we have to continue this whole thing, not just for World Wildlife Day.
Definitely. Thank you, David.
Thanks.